My name is Hannah, and this is my story about choosing something I never thought I would, my own peace over people's approval. It wasn't an easy choice. I used to think that being surrounded by people meant I was living fully, but sometimes the greatest freedom comes when you learn to walk away. In this story, I'll share why I stepped back from people to protect my peace, and how it changed everything about the way I see life. I used to live my life like I was standing on a stage, always performing, always careful to keep everyone smiling around me. At first, it felt good to be needed, to be liked, to know that my words could brighten someone's day. But slowly, without noticing, I turned into someone I barely recognized, a person who said yes when my heart whispered no, who stayed quiet to avoid arguments, and who constantly weighed my worth against other people's opinions. Every morning felt heavier than the last because I woke up carrying the invisible weight of so many expectations. Friends who wanted my constant attention, colleagues who expected me to pick up their share of work, family members who leaned on me for emotional support without thinking if I could handle it. My days were filled with hurried messages, phone calls at midnight, and endless apologies whenever I dared to say I needed a break. I became so afraid of disappointing people that I lost the courage to be honest about how tired I truly was. For a long time, I believed that love meant sacrifice, without limit, that being a good friend, daughter, or partner meant putting everyone else's needs first. But the more I tried to please everyone, the more I realized it was never enough. No matter how many times I was there to listen, someone would still feel neglected. No matter how many times I agreed to plans I didn't want to join, someone would still complain I wasn't giving enough. It became a cycle that slowly drained the color from my own life. I was always surrounded by people, yet I felt lonelier than ever, because nobody saw how much I was struggling behind my polite smile. It was painful to admit that sometimes the people I cared about most were also the ones who unknowingly hurt me the deepest. Some would get upset if I took time for myself. Others would question my loyalty if I refused to listen to their endless complaints. And while I told myself it was only temporary, days turned into months, and exhaustion turned into quiet resentment. I began to dread phone calls from certain friends because I knew they only reached out to pour their sadness or anger onto me. Every conversation felt like walking on eggshells, careful not to upset anyone, careful not to speak my truth. Looking back, I see now that my fear of losing people made me lose myself first. I forgot what it felt like to wake up without anxiety swirling in my chest, to go through a day without rehearsing every word in my mind. My life wasn't really mine anymore, it belonged to everyone else's demands. Even the small joys I once loved, like reading a book in silence or walking alone at sunset, felt like selfish acts I had to justify. I was so desperate for approval that I let my own needs become invisible. The realization didn't come in one dramatic moment, but through countless quiet evenings when I sat alone, drained and restless. I started to notice how often I swallowed my feelings, how often I apologized for things that weren't my fault, and how the thought of conflict made my heart race. The weight of pleasing everyone wasn't just exhausting, it was suffocating the person I truly was. And perhaps the hardest truth to accept was this: no matter how much I gave, It would never be enough to fill other people's emptiness. It was never really about me at all. That was the beginning of my decision to step back, to stop performing, to stop explaining, to stop begging for kindness that should come freely. It wasn't an act of anger, but of quiet self-preservation. And in that choice, I discovered something unexpected. The peace that comes when you stop trying to carry what was never yours to hold at first. Solitude felt unfamiliar, almost frightening. After years of living with constant noise pinging at all hours, voices filling my head with opinions, and the never-ending rush to keep up with everyone, I wasn't sure what to do with the sudden silence. I remember the first evening I decided to turn off my phone and just sit quietly in my room. The walls seemed to echo with thoughts I'd long ignored. For a while, it felt like loneliness, raw and sharp. But slowly, I began to hear something else beneath that silence, the gentle, steady rhythm of my own thoughts, my own heart. Without realizing it, I had become so dependent on other people's presence and validation that I had forgotten how to simply be with myself. The first weeks felt heavy. Doubts whispered in my mind. What if they forget about you? What if they stop inviting you? What if you become invisible? Yet every morning, I chose to stay with the discomfort a little longer. I took slow walks alone, noticing the rustle of leaves under my feet, the soft glow of the sky at dawn, and the peace that came from having no one to impress, no conversations to rehearse. It felt strangely liberating to walk without wondering if someone might call. Without feeling the urge to share every moment online, I started writing down my thoughts at night, not to share them, but to understand them. For the first time, I asked myself simple questions. What do I truly enjoy? What drains me? Who makes me feel lighter? And who makes me feel smaller? At first, the answers were painful. I realized that some of the people I thought were closest to me only stayed close because I kept giving, listening, and fixing. When I stopped doing that, the silence from them spoke louder than words. It hurt, but it also felt honest. For so long, I had measured my worth by how useful I was to others, but sitting alone, I began to see value in simply existing, breathing, and being. One morning, I remember sitting by the window with a cup of tea, watching the rain trace lines on the glass. I felt an unexpected wave of calm. It wasn't dramatic or magical, just a quiet realization that I was okay, right there, in that moment, without anyone's approval. That small moment became a turning point. Instead of running from solitude, I started to embrace it. I read books slowly, not rushing to finish them so I could talk about them. I listened to music and paid attention to every lyric, every note. I cooked meals just for myself, lighting a candle even when no one else would see. I discovered that solitude wasn't emptiness. It was space. Space to breathe, to heal, and to remember who I really was before the noise. It allowed my mind to slow down and my heart to soften. I no longer felt the need to explain my silence or apologies for choosing a quiet night over a crowded gathering. The more time I spent alone, the more I realized that peace wasn't something I had to find in other people. It was something I could build within myself. And in that stillness, I discovered my own voice again. Not the voice shaped by other people's expectations, but the quiet, steady voice of my true self. It spoke gently, reminding me of forgotten dreams, hidden fears, and quiet strengths. I realized that being alone didn't mean being unloved. It meant loving myself enough to listen deeply. Solitude became my teacher. It showed me that calm isn't found by avoiding life, but by meeting it fully without the endless chatter, the performance, the pressure. And in that quiet space, I found a kind of strength I never knew I had. The strength to walk away, to say no, and most importantly, to be enough for myself. I stopped chasing constant connection because I understood something simple but powerful. When you learn to enjoy your own company, you stop needing everyone else to fill the silence. You see people more clearly, not as your only source of happiness, but as companions, not saviors. And that realization brought a peace deeper than anything I had ever felt in a crowded room. The power of solitude wasn't in isolation, was in the freedom it gave me to choose, to breathe, and to truly live. It took me time to realize that protecting my peace wasn't selfish. It was necessary. For years, I had allowed almost anyone to walk into my life and leave their footprints, some light, some heavy, and some so deep, they took ages to fade. I thought love and friendship meant keeping my door open, always being available, always saying yes. But after discovering the quiet power of solitude, I finally understood something that changed everything. My peace was worth more than pleasing people who never truly cared for my well-being. The shift didn't happen overnight. At first, even the thought of distancing myself from certain people filled me with guilt and anxiety. I worried they would think I had become cold or arrogant. But the truth was, I had spent too long bending to everyone else's moods, carrying the weight of other people's disappointments, and drowning in problems that weren't mine to fix. Every time I let someone's negativity crash into me, I felt the calm I had worked so hard to build slip through my fingers. And slowly, painfully, I realized that some people only came to me because I never said no. They weren't really looking for my company. They were looking for a place to leave their pain. So, I began to draw gentle but firm boundaries. At first, it was as simple as not answering a call when I knew I was too tired to listen with a kind heart. Then, it became choosing to leave group chats that were filled with gossip and bitterness. I stopped explaining myself every time I said no to plans that drained me. And most importantly, I stopped believing that other people's disappointment was my responsibility to heal. Every boundary I placed felt like reclaiming a small piece of myself, like closing the windows during a storm to keep the rain from flooding my home at times. It was heartbreaking. Some people faded away when they saw they couldn't use my ears as a dumping ground anymore. Some grew distant when they realized I wouldn't always be the one to initiate, to check in, to fix broken plans. And it hurt, because I had loved them in the only way I knew, by giving too much of myself. But in their absence, I discovered something else. Peace stayed. Even on days when loneliness knocked on my door, it never brought the same heaviness as carrying other people's chaos. Protecting my inner calm also meant being honest with myself. I had to admit which relationships were truly nurturing and which were rooted in habit, guilt, or fear. I let go of the need to be the good one, the dependable one, the friend who never says no. Instead, I chose to become the honest one one who honors her limits and speaks her truth kindly but firmly. It felt strange at first, like wearing new clothes that didn't quite fit. But over time, it started to feel like freedom. I began to notice how my days felt different. Mornings became quieter, softer. Evenings felt lighter without the weight of resentments I used to collect. My mind, once crowded with other people's dramas, now had space for my own thoughts, my own dreams. And in that space, I found clarity. The people who truly cared never made me choose between them and my peace. They respected my silence, they valued my boundaries, and they showed love, not through demands, but through understanding. The hardest lesson was realizing that I can't control how others see me. Some people will always call you distant when you protect your energy, or selfish when you choose rest over obligation. But peace taught me that it's not my job to convince them otherwise. My job is to care for my own heart so I can show up in the world with kindness that isn't forced or depleted. And I realized that peace isn't a place you escape to when life becomes too much. It's something you build, choice by choice, boundary by boundary. Now, when I feel my calm slipping away, I pause. I ask myself, is this worth my peace? And if the answer is no, I step back without guilt. Because I've learned that my peace isn't a luxury, it's the foundation for everything I love, everything I create, and everything I give. Choosing peace over people doesn't mean loving less. It means loving wisely, starting with myself. And in that choice, I found not just quiet, but strength, clarity, and a kind of freedom that no amount of approval could ever replace.